We have a dynamite healthcare policy discussion coming up that you're not going to want to miss a word of. So if we could please get everyone to come inside and close the doors. If I could have your attention, then we'll get started. First of all, someone dropped this patriotic red, white, and blue flag bracelet somewhere out near the front of the hotel. Does this belong to anyone? Or we could auction it off, I guess, but oh well. Okay. Anyway, this is at the chairman's table over here if you or somebody you know lost this bracelet. I would also like to remind you, someone just pointed out, Alan Wilson was posting on our Facebook page about the conference. Post on our Steamboat Institute Facebook page. So, you know, get out your iPads and whatever and do that. Tweet, hashtag Steamboat Freedom, or I will sick Ann McElhenney on you. Okay, it's now my great pleasure to introduce the moderator of our healthcare panel. He is not only a former congressman, he is a dairy farmer, buffalo rancher, author, great husband, father, grandfather, and an honorary director of the Steamboat Institute, Bob Beaupre.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. First of all, a moment of professional privilege, if I might. How many of you were at the dinner last night? Was that the most incredible opportunity you've ever experienced in your life? Honestly, I've just got chills thinking about it again, because what an unbelievable opportunity for what, 250, Jennifer?
280.
280 of us here in this beautiful place, Steamboat, to hear two of the really great minds out there right now on stage together. John Bolton, of course, is always unbelievable, but to put John Bolton and Peter Brooks together, hats off to you and Jennifer and Rick. Hats off to you again for pulling that off. What a phenomenal experience. What a phenomenal opportunity you presented all of us. And where's Tom McDevitt? Is he in the room? I saw Tom a little bit earlier. He mentioned the Washington Times yesterday. How many of you looked at the Washington Times this morning? All right, you and me. Thanks to the Washington Times. This is just a little tidbit to prove his point yesterday of what you get there that you maybe don't get anywhere else. You've heard of something called the stimulus plan? Started out supposedly going to be $787 billion, which sounded like real money at the time. It is now, the CBO continues to update the cost of the stimulus plan. You know, common sense might tell you that somebody along the way got a little embarrassed. This isn't going real well. Public sentiment's kind of going against us. Maybe we ought to turn the screws down a little. No. Every single time the CBO has looked at it and reassessed it and re-estimated the cost, it continues to go up. Their newest cost, as of what we learned this morning in the Washington Times, is $833 billion. That's a $46 billion increase over what they originally told us. Does government ever get it wrong the other way? The other way? Do they ever overestimate the cost? We say, oh, we found some money. No. $46 billion so far in excess of what they originally told us. Sooner or later, it will be real money, I guess, when it gets fully to $1 trillion. And lastly, Ernie, you and Matt, wherever he went, my good friend Ernie brought up the housing industry and the problems that government policy has made. I'm going to make the point on that. Claudia and I, my wife Claudia is here with me. And for a good long while, we were running a community bank, and part of that bank was originating mortgages, and our second son, who now runs our buffalo ranch over the top of the hill, was actually doing mortgages at the time, so I'd communicate with Jim from time to time. And like me, he saw the crisis coming. He said, I just can't believe the stuff they're telling us that they will underwrite and buy through Fannie, Freddie, the various government agencies. So he'd share this with me from time to time, and every morning he'd say I'd have some new program, something else that they're willing to buy, and it was always with more relaxed underwriting standards, more questionable loans, that the government was guaranteeing and telling bankers, you will make them. So one morning he calls me, this is the classic. One morning he calls, he said, Dad, you're never going to believe what's in the fax machine this morning. I said, what is it? He says, something from Freddie Mac that says they will buy all we can originate of a product they're now calling a NINA loan. Anybody know what a NINA was? NINA, N-I-N-A. No income, no assets. Seriously. And they'll buy all of them that could be originated. No income qualification, no asset qualification. If you can sign your name and you got a pulse, you were going to get a loan, and the government was going to buy the loan and guarantee it. And we wonder why a few of them went bad. And so I guess that's partly why yesterday my newest best friend, Bill Black, the professor, why I got ruffled a little bit when he said it was all the private sector's fault that somehow this financial problem hit us in the face and we are where we are. Well, all that aside, we're here to talk actually about something else, a tale of two healthcare realities, and boy, are we primed for that. To help us do that, let me invite you to help me welcome to the stage, first of all, Sally Pipes. Sally Pipes is maybe as notable, as familiar a face in healthcare public policy as anybody in America today. She's president and CEO of the Pacific Research Institute. As I mentioned, she is a very familiar face, in fact, maybe the most familiar face relative to healthcare public policy. If you're watching television, if you happen to listen to radio, if you're picking up a newspaper or a magazine, you're going to see Sally Pipes' healthcare public policy everywhere because she is a renowned expert. She was an advisor to Rudy Giuliani in his presidential bid 4 years ago. Rudy's a good friend of mine as well. And maybe most interesting to all of us, she debated the infamous, and I did say infamous, Paul Krugman in front of 270 million people worldwide. My goodness. And I'm sure she kicked his you-know-what, too. Thank you, Sally. She's also married to a gentleman whose name we just heard a minute ago, the very renowned Charles Kessler, he of Claremont and McKenna fame, who on September 11th will come out with his newest book, I Am the Change. Please welcome to the stage Sally Pipes. Thank you, Sally. You pick. Ladies first. And Dr. Hal Shears. Dr. Shears is a nationally renowned pediatric urologist, so a highly specialized field. Most importantly for what we're talking about today, Hal is president of an organization called Docs for Patient Care. What an idea. Docs, patients. And as I recall, Hal, your organization really got founded somewhat out of frustration with where the AMA was taking health care. And you wanted to give a different voice to it. Hal today, in addition to maintaining his private practice, dedicates somewhere 25 to 30 hours each and every week on behalf of Docs for Patient Care and advocating real health care reform in this nation. Now, in an Obama economy, 25 to 30 hours a week, that'd be full-time employment. Somehow you're managing 2 full-time jobs. Please welcome Dr. Hal Shears. And last but certainly not least, a man you've already met and a good friend of the Steamboat Institute, Alan Wilson. Alan Wilson is the Attorney General of the great state of South Carolina. He also happens to be the youngest Attorney General in the United States. Got a staff of about 60? 200. Manage 10,000 cases at 8,000 cases at any one time. And point of reference, South Carolina is about the same size as Colorado is. My term, not necessarily one in your bio, but I know Alan is a constitutional originalist. God bless you for that. A great defender of freedom, a champion of voter ID, and was one of the 26 attorneys general, including our own here in Colorado, to sign up and challenge the Obamacare legislation in federal court. Something very unique about Alan and his family. I served, by the way, and you'll recognize this gentleman's name. Alan's father is Joe Wilson, Congressman Joe Wilson. That Joe Wilson. He lied, Joe Wilson. God bless him. But Alan has 3 brothers. All 4 of the Wilson boys are Eagle Scouts, and most impressively, all 4 of them wear the uniform right now of the United States of America. Alan is in the National Guard, an Iraq combat decorated veteran of the Iraq War. Please welcome Alan Wilson. God bless you. You bet. Where do you want to sit? Why don't you take that one? I'll look at you. All right, we are going to undertake this significant challenge of trying in about an hour or less to discuss the tale of 2 healthcare realities, because clearly we are on we are at a fork in the road relative to healthcare in the United States of America. It's going to be one way or the other, and I know all 3 of these people have pretty clear ideas as to which path that ought to be on, but maybe the consequences if we happen to take the wrong fork. We're going to begin with the scholarly legal opinion and the very expert opinion from our Attorney General from South Carolina, Alan Wilson. Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you. I was looking at the title a moment ago. It says A Tale of 2 Healthcare Realities. I would like to rename it to A Tale of 2 John Roberts. When you look at the Chief Justice that we got and the one that we ended up with, you see 2 different realities. And I have a lot of respect for Chief Justice Roberts. I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to tear him down, but I am going to take an opportunity to poke him a little and to say why I'm disgusted why the court came to the conclusion that it did. But let's be frank. While overall I consider the Affordable Care Act lawsuit a loss because in the end they're actually implementing the Affordable Care Act, there were many victories that we don't talk about. First, the court gave us everything we asked for. We asked for them to, on the Anti-Injunction Act, to rule that it did not apply. The Anti-Injunction Act basically is an old law that says if the Congress passes a tax, the issue is not right for the court to hear until you pay the tax. Well, we don't start paying the tax, I say that with air quotes around it, until 2014. The court agreed with us against the government's position that this is not a tax as it relates to the AIA. Then the court went and the court agreed with us on the Commerce Clause. It says that if you read the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, it says Congress has the power to regulate commerce, not create commerce by shoving people into the stream of commerce, by forcing them to purchase health insurance. The court agreed with what the 26 states and the NFIB asked for. By the way, a footnote to that. If everyone here is, because you're here, your IQ is, I'm going to assume your IQ is higher than the average person because you're engaged and you're interested in these issues. We all heard of the court packing plan under FDR, and that was a high water mark or a low water mark, depending on your perception and your view of the court's interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Up until FDR's administration, the court was very restrictive in what it would allow what it would allow Congress to do under the commerce power. It was only after FDR threatened to add members to the court, pack the court under his packing plan, that the court did a 180 U-turn, and in the last 80 years, the court has gone extremely liberal on its view and its interpretation of the Commerce Clause. This is the first time in over 8 decades that the court has actually rolled back the powers of Congress under the Commerce Clause. I'll come back to the individual mandate in a second, but the court agreed with us on the Commerce Clause. So that is a plus, because, I mean, to have lost that would have basically, we might as well have just carved out Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, because we're no longer a government of enumerated powers. If Congress can compel commerce, it can compel and make you do anything. Then there's the Medicaid expansion provision, or the argument that we made, and the court agreed with us. Basically, in a nutshell, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but you know, the states entered into an agreement with the federal government 40 some odd years ago, and we agreed to accept money in exchange to join this federal program, the Medicaid program. And then Obama comes along, passes a law that says you have to expand Medicaid. And if you don't expand Medicaid, the provisions of Medicaid at the state level, we're going to take away all your old money, the money we've already promised you. We've already contractually obligated ourselves to you. And the court said, no, you can't use already committed money over the last 4 decades to beat the states over the head and compel them. You can incentivize them, but you can't force them. I think one justice talked about this decision that the government was giving the states was akin to a mugger coming to you in a dark alley and saying your money or your life. That is not a real decision. That's not a real decision at all. And that's kind of what they were saying. Expand or we're going to blow you out the water. That wasn't a decision. The court agreed with us. The court agreed with us on the necessary and proper clause and their interpretation. The court, unfortunately, disagreed with President Obama as to whether or not this individual mandate was funded by a penalty or a tax. We found it interesting that for purposes of the Anti-Injunction Act applying, that the court said this is not a tax, therefore we can hear the case. But for the purposes of the constitutional enforcement, it is a tax. I wrote down a couple of quotes here in the dissent. Who here has read the dissent or has even read the opinion? Read the opinion, but make sure you read the dissent. And by the way, I could kiss Justice Kennedy on the mouth. I mean, brilliant. John Roberts said that he found a way to find this law legal, constitutional, because Congress has the power to tax. Kennedy was very astute when he said, the issue is not whether Congress had the power to frame the minimum coverage provision, the individual mandate, as a tax, but whether it did so. See, they pitched this because they're not raising taxes on us. They're penalizing people for not buying insurance coverage. And so it was amazing. The cowards in Congress said, this is not a tax, this is not a tax. Then they got sued, they ran to the court, and they said, oh, this is a tax, this is a tax. And then the second the court agreed with them, the 2 days after, what did President Obama say? It's not a tax. So look at the dangerous precedent that's been set. Future Congresses will now say, hey, we don't have to face the public by passing a tax. We'll just call it a penalty and then go to the court and say we have the ability to tax. And even though we didn't call it a tax, even though we said it wasn't a tax, even though we framed it as a penalty, we'll call it a tax at court, but not to the American people. And that's what the cowards in Congress did. I wanted to say that don't be disheartened. And this is my closing thought on my opening remarks. Don't be disheartened. People have asked me this week, are you depressed? Do you feel like you're climbing a hill? Do you just feel beat down? I say, no, I don't. Because as leaders in our movement, and I always say leaders don't have problems. Leaders have challenges and opportunities. And I'm imploring you today to be a leader. This is a challenge and an opportunity for us to shine. You shine brightest in the dark. And this is an opportunity for us to collectively stand out and send a signal to President Obama. First, we repeal and replace Obama, then we repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, and then we go forward. But they talk about a 100-year plan. The 100-year plan of the 5 tenets, the pillars of this institute. And that's what we need to get behind. This is a temporary setback. It is a temporary setback, but it is a glowing reminder that elections have consequences. And President Obama has 2 members of the court. Remember what he said last night, what John Bolton quoted him as saying last night when he spoke to President Medvedev. He'll have more flexibility after this next election. There might be at least 2 members of the Supreme Court retiring in the next 4 years. That is why this election is so important. So don't feel depressed. Don't feel beat down. This is our time to shine. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. Dr. Shears, from the perspective, the unique perspective of somebody who's actually in healthcare as a physician, let's have your thoughts as to where we're at in this fork in the road.
Well, thank you, Bob, and I'd like to thank the Steamboat Institute for allowing me to participate in this very esteemed panel and conference. I'm going to talk to you about healthcare from a practicing physician's standpoint, which is important for you to understand because I'm telling you reality from boots on the ground and the more than 5,000 doctors that I message to on a regular basis. And you need to understand, there's one truism that you have to understand is that what is bad for doctors is bad for patients. And so let me tell you what this means, where we're going on this particular fork. And there's another road that can be taken that I hope to have time to share with you. But the window of opportunity is closing, and that's why we have to face this reality of where we're at. The first reality is that the Obamacare plan steals $716 billion out of Medicare. And that means less services for seniors, less reimbursement for providers, and this money goes to fund yet another entitlement under this federal government. The SGR is very much a big problem. That's the doc fix. And I don't want to get into the weeds, but basically it's a statutory obligation to decrease the reimbursement to Medicare if costs go above a certain level. And that has never happened because of fear that doctors would stop taking Medicare, so the can constantly got kicked down the road, and now the bill is up to 30%, and that bill is coming due on January 1st. 30% decrease in physician reimbursement on Medicare. You may have heard about IPAB, read about it in the newspapers, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. That's one of the 159 new agencies under Obamacare. That's 159 new agencies. This one is probably the worst because their only role is to decrease reimbursement for Medicare, initially to just physicians because that's all they can do, because the Hospital Association cut a deal where they're exempt until 2020. So it only means physician reimbursement decrease. How much? We don't know, but we have some glimmer of what that might mean because MedPAC, the Medicare Payment Advisory Committee, which is an advisory committee right now, but will basically morph into IPAB, MedPAC has suggested a 50% decrease to specialist reimbursement, 30% to primary care over the next 10 years. So what does this mean in terms of the private insurance market? Well, private insurance is very much tied into what happens in Medicare because most insurance companies tie their reimbursement to that. So that means they're going to have the license to arbitrarily decrease reimbursement to physicians. And I think that one of the speakers in the last session said doctors pass that along. Doctors don't pass that along. Only 5% of patients get a bill. The rest are all contractually obligated with insurance companies or the federal government. So doctors are going to be unable to meet their overhead. And how are they going to respond? Well, first by downsizing, firing people. Millions of jobs are going to be lost in the healthcare sector. That means services to patients are going to suffer tremendously. Doctors are going to close their practices. We're seeing it already, but that's going to escalate. Those who do continue to practice are going to use physician extenders to be able to see more patients because the key is volume. The more volume you run through your office, it's the only way you're going to meet overhead. That means less time with patients and probably not even seeing a doctor. On this path, there's going to be more regulation on doctors' behavior coming from Washington. From the 159 new agencies that I mentioned, healthcare information technology, the electronic medical records that everybody is told is going to be, the panacea for all of our problems. It's a tremendous boondoggle, and what it is, it's a way to track behavior of physicians and push them in the direction that the federal government is mandating us to go in. And for those who decide to do the right thing, there'll be harsh penalties for those who buck the system. And physicians are, under this law, required to give away care, and physicians have to assume all the responsibility. And so all the risk that some of the bad decisions of the federal government coming down all fall on the backs of the physicians. The Affordable Care Act is heavily weighted toward a new system that we can go into and question and answer called accountable care organizations, which is basically HMOs on steroids. You remember the capitated HMOs back in the 1990s, how great that worked out for everybody. This is going to be worse. Yeah. This gets worse. I'm sorry to bring everybody in this room down.
I'm starting to feel sick.
Yeah. We have a doctor.
The Affordable Care Act.
Is there a doctor?
Any
What
doctor
about
in
me?
the house?
The Affordable Care Act outlaws the ability for physicians to augment their income from the decreasing reimbursements that they're going to be seeing from the work that they do one-on-one with patients. So surgery centers, physician-owned hospitals, laboratories, testing facilities, all gone. So what's going to happen? Well, doctors are going to leave medicine quicker than is already happening. Right now, 30,000 doctors or more are retiring every year. We're only producing 25,000 doctors in medical schools, so just do the math. But that number is going to escalate. The The conservative estimates are that 10 to 15% of doctors will retire when Obamacare is fully implemented. And that, people throw around statistics, but what does that really mean in terms of doctors? That's 90,000 to 135,000 doctors at the prime of their careers. The best ones, they're going to go, they're going to leave, because it's just not going to be possible for them to stay in practice. And some of the reports bring that number up to 30 to 45%, and 45% was from Investors Business Daily. 50%, this is not a derogatory remark, so please don't take it the wrong way, but 50% of physicians that we now produce are women. That's great, but women, and the studies have been done, so this is not opinion. 50% of, the women physicians practice less years because they're raising families. They are job sharing, working less than their male counterparts. So that makes this problem even worse. So how is this problem going to be solved? With foreign medical graduates whose training we have no knowledge about. It's going to be an instant pathway to citizenship for a large number of people from around the world. Also, physician extenders, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. They're all a very important part of the healthcare team, but they're not physicians. And this is happening at the same time that the training of U.S. doctors is declining. It's getting worse. The hours that they can train has been drastically restricted. The number of years in their residency have been cut. And just this generation of doctors, they have different work ethic than the older doctors. They're more interested in lifestyle than they are in building medical practices. So this is a Armageddon waiting to happen. On this path, Medicare Advantage, which many of you have, disappears. Businesses stop offering insurance to their employees because it's cheaper to throw them into the public option. And so we're going to have Medicaid for all, Medicaid, which is worse than Medicare. So all sectors of healthcare are going to pay heavily, especially medical device companies or biotech. Get this, they have to pay more than a 3% tax on their gross revenues, not their net revenues, their gross revenues. This is going to drive the small companies, the innovative companies, out of business or out of this country, and it's happening already. And insurance companies, who I'm no friend of, they'll be heavily controlled in the state insurance exchanges. They'll be unable to stay in business, and they're going to go out of the healthcare business. And we're seeing that happen all over the country. That's happened already. The government is going to step in, fill the void with a single payer option, and that means the end of private practice as we know it. So what are the unknowns? Well, will there be options to deliver health care out of this model? Don't know, but that will depend on the new healthcare czar, the Secretary of HHS. Will doctors be conscripted into service to be able to, or to be tied, their licensure be tied to seeing Medicare or Medicaid patients? And the answer to that is possibly. That's already being discussed in Congress, and when that happens, I guarantee you there will be a physician revolution in this country. So I said what's bad for doctors is bad for patients. I've explained why that is, but you also have to remember there is no health care without doctors, and that's why it's really important for us all to come together. And what else is coming? Let me share this with you. It's going to be impossible to find doctors. It's going to be worse for seniors and the poor. Having an insurance card is only going to mean a place on an ever-increasing line. There probably will be a two-tier system of health care. We don't know what that's going to shake out like, but there will be health care for those who can afford it. For some people, it may mean offshore options. It will definitely mean those who are politically connected will have the opportunity to get the health care that they need. Just look, for example, at the 1,400 waivers for Obamacare that have been granted by the Secretary of HHS. And healthcare costs are going up for everybody. All the free stuff isn't free. It's going to be paid for by insurance companies. It's going to be delivered by doctors. It's going to be paid for by all of you. If you expect to get services, knee replacement or some other surgery, you may not be able to get it because the agencies that are regulating healthcare are not going to approve it for certain categories of people. There will be rationing of care, I guarantee it. There'll be shift medicine. So you might see a doctor, but it won't be the same doctor you see the next day, again, because of the manpower shortage. And if you think that this healthcare information technology is a great thing, we already see the security breaches in systems where in the government, in the Pentagon, there's security breaches. What's going to happen to your healthcare records when they are in a system that is just incapable of protecting them? It's going to be a nightmare. So what would happen if Barack Obama were defeated and both houses of Congress were controlled by the GOP? What would, could, and should happen? Well, the two biggest drivers of healthcare are the fact that the third-party payment system has taken patients out of the ability to pay for their health care. They're not tied to what health care really is. It's prepaid health for most people. And medical liability, the whole medical liability industry and defensive medicine tied to it, it's the second biggest driver of healthcare costs. It accounts for as much as $650 billion with a B dollars every year. And Obamacare doesn't even address that. So we have to control costs, and this can happen a number of ways. I'll just take 2 minutes and just go through this with you. If patients had skin in the game by, first of all, being able to purchase insurance over in a competitive health insurance market across state lines, that would be a big step. Getting rid of all the regulation, all the mandates that you heard of that states require insurance policies to have. Why does a 50-year-old need maternity benefits? If you were able to tailor your health care insurance to your needs, and there was a competitive market, the prices would plummet. In addition, if you could uncouple health care insurance from the workplace by giving people the ability to purchase their own health care and then give them the same tax breaks that employers have, that would uncouple it from work, and people won't be tied to jobs that they don't want to be tied to. And then, again, this gives people the flexibility to have the skin in the game and be able to become good consumers. And how do you do that? By promoting health savings accounts, high-deductible health savings accounts, which Obamacare will be phasing out, but allow them to shop for health care and reward good healthcare behavior. No smoking, weight loss. Let premiums come down, and that's happened in some insurance policies already. But put that into effect on a broad scale. And then what you would do is make the system more transparent by having physicians and hospitals and testing facilities post their fees and compete for patients' business in an open market. That's all. More competition is better for everybody's healthcare costs and healthcare quality, not less competition, less options. And I can go on, but we'll save it for the questions.
Well done, Doctor. Well done. In my introduction to Sally Pipes, I failed to mention one other important factor. Sally Pipes was born a Canadian, but in 2006, you became a naturalized American?
I did, yes.
Okay. President Sally Pipes, tell us what's going on in the world of healthcare public policy.
Well, I'd like to thank the Steamboat Institute for inviting me here today and to be part of this panel. And Hal's an old friend, and we're in the battle together. This really is a battle. On March 23rd, 2012, the Affordable Care Act celebrated its 2nd anniversary, and I'm hoping it is the last anniversary of the Affordable Care Act. 54% of Americans want to see this health care law repealed and replaced. And that statistic has been common since the law came into being. You are the people who are going to have to get out there and be active, because people on the other side, Families USA, the Center for American Progress, Healthcare America Now, all of these organizations are out fighting to keep this law. So you are the people who are going to have to fight against it, because if it comes into being, if it's not repealed and replaced, we are going to have it forever. I like to say understanding healthcare is similar to unraveling an onion. There are many layers and many tearful moments. All of us want affordable, accessible, quality care. The question is, how do we achieve that goal? And there are two competing visions for healthcare reform. One, which relies on empowering doctors and patients, which Hal talked about and which I am in favor of. The other relies on increasing the role of government in our healthcare system through increased taxes, mandates, subsidies, and controls on insurance companies. This is what President Obama wanted with the Affordable Care Act. It's what he got. And I think his ultimate goal is what the late Senator Ted Kennedy called Medicare for all. In America today, we spend about 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare, 1/5 of our economy. Everyone says it's too much. I don't know if it's too much. Maybe it's too little. After all, impatient Americans, like myself now, we want the best and we want it now. And as Bob said, I'm from Canada. I grew up under a single-payer system. Private health care in Canada is outlawed under the Canada Health Act. Canada spends 11.4% of GDP on health care. But what does that mean? The government sets a global budget and says, that is what we're spending on health care. What is the result of that? Ration care, long waiting lists for care, and lack of access to the latest treatment and technology. My mother, in June 1995, called me and said, she lived in Vancouver, I have colon cancer. I said, well, Mom, how do you know you have colon cancer? And she said, I just know I have it. I said, well, have you been to the doctor? No. So she called up her GP, general practitioner, and went, and he felt around her stomach and said, well, I don't think that you have colon cancer, but we'll do an x-ray. So my mom called and said, I had an x-ray done, and I don't have colon cancer, but I think I do. So I said, well, Mom, you don't detect colon cancer with an x-ray. You need a colonoscopy. So my mom called back and said, my daughter said, I have to have a colonoscopy, the impatient American. And so he said, well, I'm sorry, but you're a senior, and at your age, you can't get a colonoscopy because we have so many people waiting 8 to 10 months to get a colonoscopy who are younger and who have serious problems. So my mom, being a nice Canadian, said, well, that's the way it is. By November, my mom had lost 30 pounds, and she called me on a Sunday morning and said, I knew it, I have colon cancer. I'm hemorrhaging. So I called the doctor, and my mom went to the emergency room at Vancouver General in an ambulance. She spent 2 days in the emergency room, 2 days in the transit lounge, waiting for a bed in a ward. Most of us think of the transit lounge at Heathrow waiting to get a flight to Rome or Paris or whatever, but you're not counted as waiting when you're in transit. My mom got her colonoscopy, and she died 2 weeks later from metastasized colon cancer. You can control healthcare costs if you deny it. This is the result that we are going to see in this country. The president had two main objectives with his healthcare reform: universal coverage and bending that cost curve down. We now know we are not going to achieve universal coverage. We have about 50 million Americans who are uninsured. Doesn't mean they don't get health care. 14 million are already eligible for CHIP and Medicaid. But we are going to have about 11 million added to Medicaid under this program, and the rest will receive subsidies from the federal government. But according to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2020, we will still have 30 million Americans uninsured. I ask you, is this universal coverage? The second thing is bending the cost curve down. Remember, the president wanted a health care bill that cost $900 billion over 10 years. The CBO costed it at $940 billion over 10 years. Well, the CBO has just come out and said the Affordable Care Act from the decade 2012 to 2021 is already at $1.76 trillion. That's almost double the original estimate. I and many other economists believe that this healthcare law, unless repealed and replaced, is going to cost about $2.6 trillion over the decade 2014 to 2023, because the cost drivers don't come into effect until 2024. Medicaid expansion, employer mandate, individual mandate, state-based exchanges, insurance companies not being able to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, and no lifetime caps. So we're going to be looking at something that costs about $2.6 trillion over 10 years. And remember Medicare, when it came into being in 1965, 47 years ago, Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society. It cost $3 billion in the first year. They predicted it would cost $12 billion by 1990. In fact, Medicare in 1990 cost $110 billion. So why would I even respect the number of $2.6 trillion? So we're not going to have universal coverage. We're not going to bend the cost curve down. Hal talked about a number of the solutions that I have in my new book, the PIPES plan, the top 10 ways to dismantle and replace Obamacare. Empowering doctors and patients, changing the tax code, allowing people to buy insurance across state lines. I want to talk briefly about Medicare. Remember Nancy Pelosi? She is the congresswoman from my district where I work. Fortunately, I don't vote in San Francisco. But she has said over and over again, if we make the changes that Paul Ryan is talking about to Medicare, Medicare patients are going to be dying in the streets. Well, Hal mentioned the CBO has re-estimated the amount that Medicare is going to have to be reduced, $716 billion over 10 years. That's up from the $500 billion they estimated originally. If Nancy Pelosi, remember, we have to pass this bill so that we can find out what's in it. Well, perhaps she should have read the bill so she could find out what's in it. Tremendous reduction in the ability of seniors to get their health care. And the Medicare trustees and the Congressional Budget Office have both predicted that Medicare will be bankrupt by either 2022 or 2024. Today, we have 47 million Americans who are on Medicare, and we think that 1 in 3 are already having a hard time finding a doctor. So Medicare has to undergo some changes because it costs $500 billion a year today, and it's going to cost, according to the CBO, $1 trillion in 2022. So Nancy Pelosi, people are going to die in the streets if changes are made. They are going to die in the streets if changes aren't made. Paul Ryan's plan, which he has amended, you know, people will be today, people at age 55 can be able to stay on traditional Medicare. By 2023, people who are now 55 and older and younger will be able to get traditional Medicare or get premium support. We need means testing. We need raising that eligibility age from age 65. Right now, under Ryan's plan, it would go to 67 by 2034. But Medicare will be bankrupt by then. Let's raise the eligibility age now, because when that program came into being, Americans only lived to age 65. Today, they live to age 79. So those are some of the things that I believe in. I ask you, who do you want to be in charge of your health care? An HMO bureaucrat, a government bureaucrat, or do you yourself want to be in charge of your health care? Danny Williams, the Premier of Newfoundland, when he was diagnosed with a heart problem, he went to Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami, Florida, and paid out of pocket for his heart surgery. He came back to Newfoundland, and the Canadian media said, how could you possibly leave this great country and get health care work done in Miami? Danny Williams said, it's my heart, it's my health, it's my choice. Universal choice is the key to universal coverage in this country. If we do not repeal and replace Obamacare, we are on the road to serfdom in this country. We will not be able to find an off-ramp. 2016, it will be too late. As my dear friend P.J. O'Rourke says, if you think healthcare is expensive now, just wait until it's free. Thank you.
Sally, we'll go to questions from the audience in just a second, but very quickly, if I might ask each of you at least one question. Sally, first of all to you, all of you have painted a rather dire picture of where we're at in this fork in the road relative to health care policy. Having been in Congress for a little while, one of my observations, unfortunately, is that Congress, regardless of what party is in power, doesn't undo things very well. There's lots of talk of canceling this program or cutting back that program, but it doesn't happen very often. Now we're faced with what I think is an obvious, but still I would submit a monumental task of actually repealing Obamacare and then replacing it with something else that we'd all like to think would work better. What if we don't get a Republican House and Senate, we don't get Mitt Romney in the White House? What if one of those critical political pieces isn't in place, or for whatever other reason? Perhaps Congress simply loses its backbone and its will, and we can't get a majority of votes to repeal this. Where would we be in 2016, next time we're faced with a presidential election? Where would we be, in your opinion, if we don't get this task of repeal and replace accomplished?
Well, I think there are two alternatives. One, I'm going to go back to Canada because they're doing some great things with a Conservative Prime Minister. The second thing is,
That's you. Is there room for the rest of them?
The second thing is I'm going to buy a bunch of old ships and create the Liberty ships so that Hal can be my doctor out beyond the 12-mile limit.
Absolutely.
But you raise a very good point. It's very depressing because coming from Canada, people keep saying to me, well, you know, if the Canadian healthcare system is as bad as you painted it, you know, why hasn't it been changed? And the issue is, first of all, Canadians are lovely people and they don't like to rock the boat. But second of all, most people don't really need to use the healthcare system for something serious. So if you poll Canadians in general and they haven't had to get a specialist and get a specialist to treat them, they think it's fine. You know, I'm all fine. I go to my doctor if I have sore throat, whatever. But when you poll those Canadians who have had to sit on a waiting list to get a specialist, those are the people that hate the Canadian healthcare system. And you have to remember, Canadians have an escape valve. 46,000 Canadians a year come to the United States and pay out of pocket for procedures that they find the waiting list is too long for their own health. So as my great mentor, Milton Friedman, used to ask me on an ongoing basis, Sally, show me a program that is ever repealed by the government, the mohair subsidy, and a couple of things, but nothing significant. So that's why I say, if this is not repealed and replaced, if we don't get a Republican president, keep the House, take the Senate with at least 51 votes so this could be repealed through reconciliation, we are on the road to serfdom, and it's going to be a disaster, and Hal's friends and young kids are not going to go into medicine.
Thank you. A quick observation, if I might. I recall when I was in office and health care reform was already on the table then, too. And I go to various town halls, not unlike this group that we've got in front of us, and somebody would invariably go to a microphone and say, well, when you guys get around to fixing health care, and I was there from 03 to 07, when you guys get around to fixing health care, you can do anything you want, just don't change mine.
Right, yeah.
What's yours? And invariably, they were a federal employee. They were part of the federal employee health benefits plan, the same insurance that members of Congress had, which is everybody seems to absolutely love because, as you correctly, in my opinion, pointed out, it provides choice. It's a premium support plan. Government says, here's your voucher. You shop through this menu of plans and pick the one that best fits you. It strikes me as one of the great paradoxes, and we see so many in politics, but the party that would pretend to be the champions of pro-choice don't think we can exercise our choice relative to our own health care. I think the Ryan plan has been, for Medicare reform, has been hypocritically demonized, and wrongly so. You care to jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, well, of course, and I think that, you know, Ryan Wyden plan, that was the first plan, but Ryan has made some changes to his plan, you know, and so the point being that if you have premium support, you would get a sum of money to purchase private insurance. It would be tied to the second cheapest healthcare plan. If you wanted a more expensive plan, you would just pay up to that. If you had bought a cheaper plan, the cheapest plan, you would get a rebate. So, and tying Medicare cost increases to GDP growth plus 0.5%, I think it's all doable. And it's unfortunate that the people on the other side are taking the Ryan Romney team nonstop, talking about how people are going to be dying in the streets, as I said, Nancy Pelosi. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest issues in the healthcare debate in this presidential election. And I hope that all of you are going to stand up and say what I said about Nancy Pelosi Seniors are going to be in a much more difficult position. Why should someone like Warren Buffett be eligible for Medicare? He doesn't need Medicare. That program should be there for the very people that are earning, that have $20,000 a year or less in income. Let's help the people that need help, not those people who don't.
Amen. Dr. Shears, my good friend Professor Bill Black yesterday, among other things, he said that I think this is almost a direct quote, the European healthcare system was superior to our U.S. system. That caught my attention. I'm guessing that you have an opinion about that, and if you might, I'll just ask a second question right along with it. He also implied that the states, I'm guessing what he really meant by that was that government somehow could provide and manage health care better than I took it as docs and patients together. Was he right?
No, I think he couldn't be more wrong. First of all, facts are a inconvenient thing to deal with. The healthcare in the U.S. is so superior to that of every place around the world. You don't hear people saying, "Oh, gee, I'm going to go to Finland for my care," or "I'm going to go to Belgium for my care." No, but those countries... Venezuela, Cuba.
Yeah.
Could do that.
But those countries are listed as having superior health care than the U.S. on the WHO scale, which is what I'm sure he was referring to. When you look critically at health care in the U.S. and compare it to the rest of the world, the U.S. is on top in all the important categories. 7 out of the 10 most prevalent cancers have the highest cure rate, highest disease-free interval in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world. When you look at screening programs, the U.S. outshines the rest of the world by a large factor. What the liberals, what the left likes to say in supporting those figures is, well, let's look at infant mortality. Well, let's look at infant mortality. Babies who die in the U.S., every single death is counted as an infant mortality. Even the 23-week science projects that we see in the intensive care units around the country, all counted. In Europe and in many other countries of the rest of the world, they don't count those. In fact, they don't count a death until 3 months full term after they're born. So, of course, their numbers are going to look better than they do in the U.S. So, you have to really critically go into these figures. If you want to look at death rates higher in the U.S. When you subtract out homicides and auto accidents, U.S. highest survival than the rest of the world. So, I think you have to really be realistic about what you're looking at. Everybody is banging down the doors to come to the U.S. for their health care, banging on the doors to get trained in the U.S. So, I think that, you just have to look at the facts and face reality. As far as states doing a better job or government than you are capable of doing or doctors are able to manage, that's just nonsense. Now, some states can manage health care like Medicaid better than other states. If you look at a state like Indiana under Mitch Daniels, who has taken Medicaid, and he's put patient responsibility into the equation where they can make choices. They get a grant and it goes into an account, and they can become consumers and spend their healthcare dollars wisely and make decisions whether they're going to go to an emergency room for a cold or an earache or wait the next day and go to a clinic where the cost is 10 times less. If they keep money in that account, it goes to them the next year in terms of rollover plus less of a copay. Now they have to pay a $5 copay. The next year, if they've been good consumers, they pay a $3 copay. A state like Tennessee with TennCare, they ran that into the ground. And I think that there's definitely differences in how states manage things, but it comes down to personal responsibility, to having skin in the game and having people in charge of their own health care decisions. You know what's best for you and for your family, not a bureaucrat in your state government or, God forbid, in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Attorney General, you spoke very well and framed, I think, the ruling, the consequences of the Supreme Court ruling. I'm concerned. I'm certainly pleased, I guess, that that if they were going to find Obamacare constitutional, the good news is they didn't use the Commerce Clause to defend it, but curiously enough, they used the taxing authority powers of the federal government to do it. I'm one of those who's worried that we just saw an enormous expansion of the power of the federal government. If that is the case, one, opine on that, and secondly, is there a legislative opportunity, is there a legislative means within Congress or the people to fix that, to tighten back up what I think the Supreme Court in this decision just loosened greatly?
Remember what I said earlier, that they didn't take the Constitution and expand the powers for Congress. What they did, the majority, Justice Roberts writing for the majority, is, and I even wrote the quote here because I didn't want to forget it, it says, to say that, this is what the dissent said, to say that the individual mandate merely imposes a tax is not to interpret the statute, but to rewrite it. That's correct, but I'm going to go one step further. Chief Justice Roberts and the majority writers, when they passed this under the tax power, they didn't rewrite the statute. They rewrote the facts to justify the conclusion. They had to disagree with the facts that were presented to them, and that's that a penalty was passed, but they said, no, we're going to go ahead and call it a tax. That goes back to my original argument. For purposes of avoiding the Anti-Injunction Act prohibition, making it right, they had to say, this is not a tax. So you don't have to wait to pay it in order for us to hear the controversy. But for purposes of constitutional enforcement, we're going to say it is a tax and give you the tax power. So they didn't expand Congress's power, in my view. They just completely ignored the facts. They didn't apply the facts to the Constitution. Now, some people might disagree with that analysis, but had they actually applied the facts as they were given to them, because they're an appellate court. You can't make up your facts when you're the appellate court. They had received the facts and applied the Constitution strictly, then they would have struck it down under the tax power. So that is one of the concerns I have. The second part of your question was, is there a way to legislatively fix it? I'm in the executive branch of state government, and I believe that there's a new evolution in the attorneys general, because never we had a federal government that has expanded so much, whether it's under the EPA, the NLRB, the Justice Department, with Obamacare, Dodd-Frank. I'm focused on enforcing and protecting and defending the Constitution. The legislative fix is more for members of Congress. Repeal and replace is the only avenue I see right now for purposes of getting this thing struck down finally. We have taken the fight to the courts. The courts have given Congress their prize under the tax power. But I do, if I may bootstrap one thought to this, because I don't know if I'll get a chance to say it again. I enjoyed listening to y'all talk about the policy implications, and I really loved what I loved yesterday about the debate was talking about unintended consequences. I'm a huge fan of Thomas Sowell. Anyone ever read his books? Highly recommend you do it. I took what Thomas Sowell writes about, and I applied it to this, and I went and spoke to some members in the health insurance industry. And one of the unintended consequences I thought was really interesting was they tell us that there's an age rating ban that basically the free market says that someone in their 60s is going to pay, by market conditions, 6 times the premiums what someone in their 20s will pay for health insurance. So Obamacare comes along and says, we're going to save senior citizens from having to pay that much, and we're going to cap it at 3 times. So now 60-something-year-olds can only pay up to 3 times what a 20-something-year-old pays. So they've cut it in half. What's an unintended consequence of that? Insurance companies have to absorb that cost somewhere. So what do? They raise the insurance cost on what? 20-year-olds. Thereby doing what? Raising it on seniors, because it goes up. The three times goes up. So the floor rises, so does the ceiling. So both seniors and folks in their 20s are paying something. Now that 25-year-old's paying, I think I've seen projections somewhere in $7,000 a year in the next 4 to 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
I'm using round numbers. That 25-year-old's now paying $7,000 a year 5 years from now for health insurance premiums, or they could pay a $695 penalty. Now, who here 25 has got a choice between $700 a year or $7,000 a year? What are you going to do?
But part of the reason why that happened was because that market completely disappeared because now people can keep their kids on health care until they're 25, and so it has decreased the pool even more.
Well, good point, good point. But now you've got those people jumping out of the pool at 26, 25, 26, and so what happens? Who has to bear the cost of that? Not the insurance company. They're not in the charity business. To everyone else. So the death spiral goes up again. Then all of a sudden that 26-year-old's now 36 and he's out playing football with his friends and he forgets he's not 26 and he tears his ACL or screws his body up and has to have tens of thousands of dollars of reconstructive surgery. Well, guess what? He's not insured because he's been paying the penalty for the last 10 years. But guess what? There's no prohibition if you have a pre-existing condition. So he can go do what?
Get insurance.
Get insurance so he can get the medical care that he needs. So he spends tens of thousands of dollars getting repaired. What do you think he's going to do once he's gotten that surgery?
See ya.
He's going to drop the insurance policy. Right. So he paid 3 or 4 months of health insurance premiums for thousands of dollars worth of treatment, and then he drops it. That's like totaling your car and then going and getting it insured so you can get it repaired and then dropping the insurance. Who bears the cost of that? So it's one death spiral after another of the costs and the unintended consequences being passed to the taxpayer and to the premium players, and they don't even get me started on Medicaid. I've talked long enough.
Right. And also that's what's happened in Massachusetts, and that's why their costs are out of control. And Deval Patrick just signed a law to control the healthcare cost growth in Massachusetts. So, and still under Obamacare, I just want to add, while illegal immigrants won't be able to turn up and buy insurance in these state-based exchanges, they'll still be able to turn up at the emergency room under Pete Stark's EMTALA law and get coverage.
Where's Pete Stark from?
California.
Oh,
Oakland.
yeah. Rick, do we have time for a question or two?
Yeah, we have time for one. We've got about 3 minutes, so we're going to take a question.
All right, pick the right one then.
Douglas.
Pick the right one.
Actually, this follows right along what Sally was just talking about, and certainly the Attorney General. Justice Roberts, in fact, invited a political solution in his opinion. But talk about the insurance exchanges and what we at the state levels can be doing. We've seen some states already announce that they will not go ahead and put those exchanges in place. If Obama wins, God forbid, but if he wins, what can we be doing at the state level until the troops are on the horizon 4 years from now?
Well, under the Affordable Care Act, these state-based exchanges come into being for individuals and small businesses in 2014. We've just seen that 7 states have said they're not going to set up the exchanges. Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Indiana. So, I mean, the Obama administration and Sebelius are getting very, very upset about, and they're offering more money. California was the first state to take the money from the feds to set up their exchange, and here we are in August of 2012, no exchange has been set up. Peter Lee is having a terrible time. He's just hired Accenture, the management consulting firm, to see how the exchange can be set up. So I think the exchanges are terrible. The essential benefit plan within each exchange is going to make it difficult for a lot of insurance companies to be able to offer a plan based on what they're going to be able to charge. And I think this will be the ultimate crowding out of insurance, and then the move to a single-payer Medicare for all system.
If I may jump in also, the federal government is extremely nervous because they are incapable of setting up exchanges. They are relying on the states to do this. And in fact, I don't want to get into the weeds, but there's language in the law, in the Affordable Care Act, that prohibits the federal government from giving those benefits to patients. It requires the states to set it up. So the states should really they should not take that money. Right. That's my personal opinion. They should follow the lead of Indiana and Texas. Yeah.
One of the times that I think Barack Obama actually was being totally honest was when he admitted, I think it was in front of a SEIU organization group, I think it was, but anyway, he admitted that what his real objective was single payer system. And whether they got there in a hurry or they had to go in some sort of a slower progression, he didn't care, but that's where he wanted to take America. And Sally, your explanation of what's really behind these exchanges and the likely outcome, the crowding out of private insurance, I think is absolutely correct.
We've already seen a number of insurance companies quit. Principal Financial got out. 800,000 people lost their insurance. Aetna is out of the individual market in Colorado and in Indiana. There's a number of the companies that that only offered health savings accounts, which are what we support, say they're not going to be able to survive under this law.
Yeah, the comparison, the metaphor would be what he said he'd do to coal-fired plants. He won't outlaw them. He'll just make it impossible for them to be profitable and compete. So they go out of business. We're going to see, I think, and unfortunately, tragically, if Obamacare is not repealed and replaced, we're going to see the same thing in our healthcare system. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause for our panel?
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed your story.
Well done. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You bet. Great job.